Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that was really enlightening. We'll just move to another step in this interview. I would like to ask you if there is a specific process or way of thinking design. So, if you want to imagine in medicine that there's a particular way of thinking,
Yeah.
a lawyer would think in a different way.
Mhm.
So, is there a way that the designer thinks? Is there a particular laid out process for the designer to think through?
I think there's always been a process. If we, reflect on some of the things that we learned in history, the dawn of man engaging with technology. How did man discover how to use stones in creating tooling? There's always been, something that will prompt that person's imagination. There's always going to be something that's going to trigger, that challenge to find ways of solving a problem to make life easier. So it's always been there. It's just that we've come to a point whereby we've advanced in these processes to ensure that it reduces the cost implication associated with it. So again, as I stated, there is a standardized, I wouldn't say standardized process, but an accepted process of thinking when it comes to design. So in the early 60s, Stanford University more or less came up with some form of benchmark or platform that communicates what the design thinking process should be. So this is where the Stanford model comes into play. So you've got to empathize. So this is where you look at the problem and you start to rationalize the implication of the problem to the user, and then move to defining what that is. So to empathize, this is where you establish what the intent is, but you go beyond that to do further investigation around that, particularly placing the user at the center of everything, because everything evolves around the user. So once that's down, then all that converges to having some form of design rationale. So this is when the define component comes to play. So once that's been defined, you can now then ideate and then transition those ideas from paper into some form of physical construct that will give you some feedback in terms of, okay, what works, what doesn't work, and what needs to change. Then the last part will be to test it out, because at the end of the day, you need to test the product out to ensure that it checks the box at the defined bit. So at least it gives you an idea in terms of knowing that the process is not linear. Even though it might come out linear, it's not truly linear. You still have to go back to just ensure that you are on track in terms of establishing what the intended targets were and whether those targets have been met at the end. And if not, what can be done to alter that. Then the design council also came up with the double diamond concept, which is something that the design school really utilizes as part of the general curriculum. And the double diamond isn't that different from the Stanford process. It's just a question of wording. But I think what's quite interesting with that, it's more or less using the diamond shape to show at what point you have that divergent thinking. At what point does everything then converge for it to be defined before you then diverge into thinking about a number of ways to go about it. So that's more or less the double diamond. So the double diamond has more or less 4 key components. So at the front end bit, the front end is made up of the discovery bit and the definition bit. So, the discovery, this is where you're more or less exploring, different facets of the problem via research, via surveys and all of that. Then you now filter down, okay, what makes sense towards, generating ideas. Then you've got the develop. So the develop is more or less a combination of the ideation and prototyping and things like that. And then the last part is, okay, once you've done all that, then you are ready to deliver. So the delivery part will encompass, validation. How do you go about testing the product to ensure that the product conforms with whatever has been listed as the key specification for the product? So when it comes to my perspective, I've kind of like repackaged it in a way that makes sense to me. So the first element in terms of the thinking process, I've more or less looked at as situational discovery. Situational discovery in the sense that, for every idea or anything imagined is triggered by a specific situation. And that specific situation will then prompt further divergent thinking in terms of, how do you go about accruing the needed information at a preliminary level to ascertain some form of framework. So this is where the framing comes into play, because again, everything needs to be framed to establish, okay, what is, the focus, in terms of exploring, that particular design or problem statement. So that's where that bit comes into play. Then the next bit will be conceptualized research and design methods. So this is more or less, similar to the define bit, whereby you're going to use different research methodologies in garnering important data, important information, to then give you that picture of establishing what your generic design specification needs to be. And that generalized design specification would then give you that platform to start ideating or start with the conceptualization process. Because again, you are looking for at least some controlled parameter to govern the ideas you come up with, so that it doesn't seem right that you're ideating or you're conceptualizing towards set targets. So at least you've got that framework that will be governed by your DS. So once you've gone through the conceptualization process, whereby you then screen and filter what idea works or what ideas can be meshed together or integrated together, then you can then move into the iterative development phase. Iterative in the means that the idea still needs to evolve. It still needs to go through a series of processes for it to become the best possible solution, ready to be, manufactured and tested. So I think that part's very important, because again, studies have shown that the design phase of any product dictates at least 75% of the cost down the line. So if a lot of mistakes are made during that phase, then that's going to, cause a lot of issues towards, the manufacturing stage.
Yeah.
Thus, it's important to, have that. So, thus, iterative development. So it needs to, go through that level of incubation to yield that, near perfect product.
Yeah.
Then once that's done, then you go into the evaluation phase. So the evaluation phase, I think it's quite self-explanatory. You now review the product against your design specification. Have you achieved, what the intent was at the very beginning? If not, why wasn't that? And what are the opportunities for, for improvements, for further advancement? And it goes beyond that, because again, once a product is pushed to market, it still has to evolve based on the feedback or the responses that the product is getting from the market. So again, it's not a question of, jumping the hurdles, and pushing the product out there. You still need to ensure that over time you are making the needed changes to ensure that the product performs on the market. Because again, nothing's going to be perfect coming out, but if you are proactive in terms of what you're doing and you're building that archive of knowledge, this is where elements of knowledge-based engineering will come into play. Looking at things that have been done in the past and having those elements archived in some form of product data management system, and also capturing elements of the product from market and that feed it back into the design process. So yeah, it's a very complex system, but that's more or less the thinking that goes behind that. But at the end of the day, it all comes down to what works for a particular business. So there are ways of changing things. So some businesses, prototyping comes at the very beginning. Once you start part of the discovery process. Yeah. So prototyping and conceptualization comes at the forefront. Then once you've come up with some idea, then you then branch into looking at doing some preliminary research. So again, it comes down to what really works for a particular business.
Yeah, I think it should be their design philosophy, the way they really want to.
Yeah, exactly. So again, nothing's really set in stone. And again, over time, people are coming up with new concepts in terms of, okay, what method of thinking is much more efficient.
And fits their business model as well.
Fits the business model.
Yeah, thank you.